Welcome to our next episode on Geopolitics with Alex, and today we have a real treat. Remember, we've been talking quite a lot about a world in which virtually everything can be weaponized, and that for us has included technology, information, energy, even climate. Fresh, or that's a relative term, just traveled back from Sharm el-Sheikh, COP27. It's a privilege to welcome Professor Delbeke, who is our EIB chair and very much our Mr. Climate. Nice to have you.
My pleasure.
So you're fresh back from COP27, the biggest climate conference in the world. What are your first impressions? What do you expect? What do you feel about the outcome?
Well, this COP is an implementation COP, implementing the Paris Agreement that was done in 2015. Now, every gathering of the United Nations is all about negotiations, but the brutal reality is that there is not that much to negotiate, but there is so much more to implement. And so there was a lot of people in Sharm el-Sheikh. There was a bit of criticism. Why the heck are all these people doing there in Sharm el-Sheikh? But a lot of deals were done in exchanging clean technology, exchanging information about policies, exchanging all kinds of information that are valuable because the world is so diverse. And a lot of countries would like to learn from one another, in particular, not least from the European Union, because we have put up some clean policies. We have a Green Deal in the making. We have lots of technologies in the making. And of course, we do a lot on energy, if only because of the war in Ukraine.
What kind of work did you do specifically in COP27 as a representative of the school? And at the same time, what do we do here at the school on climate?
Well, we were present and organizing a number of panels with people from all over the globe, from the United States, Japan, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Indonesia, etc. So we were having discussions on carbon pricing. We have a standing record here, I think, on carbon pricing the way we do it in Europe. But there is also the voluntary carbon market that is coming up. A lot of voluntary initiatives in which the United States and Asia are taking the lead. And so improving the communication between those two systems is what we are working on. Of course, many elements of the Fit for 55 package, the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, provokes a lot of interest in the world, not least from Japan, from Korea, our major trading partners. And so a lot of questions were asked there and a lot of implementation will have to be done. And there, here at the school, we are developing a number of good ideas and implementation tools for this CBAM and for having the voluntary carbon markets made more credible, because the environmental integrity is sometimes a bit of a question, unlike what we are doing in Europe, where our carbon market is really delivering emission reductions. And with a price of 75 euros per ton of carbon dioxide, that matters for companies, the way they emit or do not emit greenhouse gas emissions.
And for those of you who don't know, Jos was also the Director General of DG Klima in the European Commission. So in many ways, what we're doing here now is building bridges between Europe and the rest of the world and practical implementation on how we can turn a tide, turn a page on climate change. Next question is on G20. So at the same time, when you are in COP27, there are big things happening in G20. The US and China are meeting. What's your assessment there?
At the beginning of the conference, there was a bit of a standoff between the United States and China as part of the spillover of the general politics. And so on climate, even if Xi Jinping and John Kerry are good personal friends, they were not having the coverage of the political level. And when in Bali, they had a long meeting between President Biden and Xi Jinping, that situation got more relaxed. And that's good news, because the two are blaming one another for the climate problem. The United States is saying, you, China, you are the biggest emitter. And China says, but you, United States, you have the highest emissions per head, per person in the world, so you have to act as well. So Europe is a bit in the middle. You know, we have much more efficient patterns of greenhouse gas emissions, but we have other cattle to fish, to fry, and we have a war in Ukraine. We have to save energy. We have to go for green hydrogen. And that is also what was happening quite well. When I said an implementation COP, that means that a lot of talks were going on, and I heard that Egypt took the benefit of the situation and signed 8 memoranda of understanding on green hydrogen. So they are investing massively in renewable energy. They have a lot of space in the desert, etc. And they are going to produce hydrogen, so much that Europe is in need for its industry, in steel, in cement, the chemical sector. So many things we need, given the war in Ukraine, where the cheap natural gas coming from Russia has completely fallen apart.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the really nice things is when I listen to you speak about climate, for instance, when you gave your annual lecture here in Florence, you never go into the blame game. You problematize the issue and say, we can blame each other from so many different angles. Let's instead look at solutions. Now, you raised the issue of the war in Ukraine, and you know, a few days back we had Zelensky coming out with his 10-point peace plan. 2 of the elements, interestingly enough, because it's about geopolitics, were on issues related to what you work with. One was on energy. He said we need energy security, and the other one was on eco or environment and climate, basically saying that, you know, this is a natural disaster. What's your take on the war in Ukraine and the way in which it affects climate?
Well, the war on itself is, of course, devastating. You know, every bomb that is exploding is a number of greenhouse gas emissions coming into the atmosphere. But let's assume that's temporary. The country has a lot of old industrial equipment. The Azovstal plant, for example, was way below European standards. Nevertheless, we were importing a lot of steel from Azovstal. So the reconstruction of the country, now that it is largely destroyed, you know, we will have to put in our newest technology. And if the European Union comes forward with a rescue package or a reconstruction package, we have to make sure that this, according to the standards we are using and developing in Europe. So the Green Deal idea should be developed and made more concrete in the reconstruction plans of Ukraine when it comes to energy, when it comes to steel, non-ferrous, lithium and other production capabilities seemingly they have available in Ukraine. So it could become really a partner in the Green Deal, provided the right investments are done.
How about on the big picture, moving on to Fit for 55? So basically the Green Deal and the aim for us to be carbon neutral in Europe by 2050. What kind of an impact do you see the war having? Because some people are saying that, well, now we're going to have to burn much more dirty fuel, you know, it's more CO2 emissions, we're using coal. But is this war sort of, is it a blessing in disguise, or is it a catastrophe for the climate? Which way do you see this?
Our European leaders had difficulties, you know, Ursula von der Leyen, Frans Timmermans, because indeed, in the short term, we are using more dirty fuel. We are using more coal, more lignite. We are digging more out of the underground because we have to scramble all available energy resources. But the message was given that this is really short term because we are in for saving energy, for changing the energy basis of our economy. We talked about green hydrogen, where to produce it, more and massive rolling out of renewable energy. So all these things are happening and will be visible in the medium-term perspective. So in that sense, how cruel the war is and how brutal the violence is there, in the medium term, we may all be better off. That's my hope, and that is also what Frans Timmermans very convincingly said. There is no question of putting, question marks behind the targets that Europe has been adopting. Just the opposite. We may, in the medium-term perspective, do much more compared to what was anticipated. It will have a cost, of course. Let's not dream. We will have to do lots of investments. And that is what was very visible also in Sharm el-Sheikh. European companies are eyeing Africa, not just Egypt, as I was mentioning, but also Oman and Qatar and Namibia and places we in the past were hardly talking about. Now they are very much in the forefront. So funny enough, or surprisingly enough is the better word, the war in Ukraine and the dropping out of Russia from our trading atmosphere creates a lot of opportunities for countries, and in particular Africa is nearby for us, and we should take that opportunity and develop also that green dimension in the trading deals that we are doing with them.
Yeah, disruption usually leads to change, and I guess in this particular case it'll force us to be more innovative to finance new forms of green energy, because we're detaching ourselves from the fossil fuels that we've been importing from Russia. Final question, how do you see your own plate of work here at the School of Transnational Governance here in the EUI? What are the big things that you are focused on right now with your team of 10, 12 assistants?
Well, we have an orientation that is very pragmatic, that is solution-based. What kind of policies, what kind of technologies, what kind of incentives for businesses do we have to turn the economy in that direction? So it's not about dramatizing too much. Of course, the situation is very sobering when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, but let's work on the solutions. And that is where training of young people is so important. And so we are teaching about our car emission standards, about carbon pricing, voluntary or our compliance market, or about fuels, or about energy and energy regulations, how to save energy. So this whole plate of things that you have to develop, that is where we teach the students the realism that it is about a new economic model. And it is not about reinventing everything. It is about the next stage in technology that we have to develop and use and invest in massively in Europe. So sustainable finance, innovation, carbon pricing are the real key issues we are working about.
With these words, I want to thank you, Jos, for being with us today, dealing with one of the biggest geopolitical and existential questions that we have in the world at the moment. And I would like to thank all of you once again for following one of our episodes on Geopolitics with Alex. See you soon again.
America made its declaration of independence.